Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, guys. Whether you're watching us on YouTube or on Rumble, I appreciate you all, and I can see that you are excited with me to host Dr. Andrew Hammond. He is a Middle East and Islamic historian at Oxford University and author of Late Ottoman Origins of Modern Islamic Thought. Dr. Andrew, it's a pleasure to have you on my channel. It's also a bigger pleasure to share your insight with the audience of Syriana Analysis, to learn from you today and also enlighten the audience and myself about the historical context of what's happening in Gaza, between Gaza and the Israelis nowadays, and also the broader geopolitical conflict. Thank you very much again for being with me today.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here.
It's always great to listen to people like yourself. I've been covering the events in Gaza after the October 7 events. I focused mostly on the media aspect of it, the atrocity propaganda, the Israeli justifications to continue the mayhem and atrocities against the Palestinians in Gaza. I also spoke about the broader geopolitical implications and the root causes of the conflict and everything. But you're a historian specializing in Middle East and Islamic history. In what context do you put the ongoing Israeli carnage in Gaza? And are there any historical lessons Israel should have considered before starting this carnage on Gaza, but ignored in its conduct in Gaza?
Wow, where to begin? I think we're all so shocked by what's going on, and it's just got worse and worse and worse. Of course, from the beginning of the Israeli operations in October, it's looked to me a lot similar to the American reaction after 9/11. This kind of pathological approach towards, in their very vague general understanding, the Arabs. Of course, for them, this is a completely pejorative term. And I think for the sort of American neoconservative class, the heart of the beast, in their view, of resistance and the Arabs is the Palestinians. It's the kind of beating heart of resistance in their view. And that's something they've been wanting to crush for a long time. And remember, after 9/11, there were lots of crazy things that were saying. You would hear various figures of this neocon movement coming out with comments like, we need to attack Mecca itself. That was somehow the heart. They're always looking for the heart of the belly of the beast, the heart of darkness. They want to get right to the center. They're always using this ridiculous apocalyptic language from the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, and they're obsessed with using that kind of language. And, they were talking about how we have to go after Mecca, we have to go after Saudi Arabia, but not just Saudi Arabia, we have to go after Mecca. So, of course, it shifted from Afghanistan, where Al-Qaeda was, to Iraq. But I think, it always seemed to me that what was lurking in the background was the problem of Palestinians. What was the reason they even had a problem with Iraq? Why did they care about Iraq having nuclear weapons? Many countries have nuclear weapons and they don't mind at all. Not on number one, the Israelis. The main problem with Iraq was it was a threat to Israel. It's an ideological obsession. There's a debate going on now. You can see it over social media. It's a good debate about to what strategic usefulness does Israel present to America. And I think there is the beginning of a serious debate about what is the point. Many Americans are asking, do we really need all this trouble? What are we getting out of this? But the element of it that we're never going to get over is the ideological element. There's this ideological, obsessive commitment to Israel for different reasons. I find interesting that many people who claim they're secular are coming out with arguments about Israel as the kind that comes from a certain kind of Christian place of Christian cultic belief, as well as this idea that it's now the heart of Western civilization itself.
Yes.
So you're proving the superior values of Western civilization through violence. Yes. Which I find absolutely ridiculous. It has absolutely no ethical basis whatsoever. But to go back to the point, they were obsessed with Iraq because it was a threat to Israel. Now, all these years later, you have, in their view, a comparable act, what Hamas did on October 7. So it's now time to really smash this whole Palestinian thing. It's getting a bit out of hand. Too many people are beginning to kind of believe in this issue and to not see it simply in these kind of essentialist terms of Palestinians, because it's not really about the Palestinians. It's about people A who have been oppressed by another entity, people A, people B with certain entities behind them. It's a humanitarian issue, but of course they want to pathologize it and essentialize it as it being about these people who are problematic, who are the Palestinians. So I think, now it kind of, I find it pathological. I mean, when you listen to the American spokesman speaking in the State Department or on the Pentagon, there's this kind of callous hatred behind their words for anything we can call Palestinian, because for them, it's the beating heart of a whole load of evils in their mind that are resistant to the American will, expressed via this rogue state. At the same time, this is happening. I think a lot of people made this observation at the beginning. It's happening at the same time as this moment where there's now a serious challenge to the American-led global order. I don't think we can really talk anymore about unipolar order. I think that's over. We're not at the point where there are other powers that can challenge the Americans on the same level, but we're getting there. And it's a different arena, and you get a real sense from these Western countries, I mean, the Americans and the kind of sad little hangers-on around them, that this is about reinstating their position globally that they feel is slipping.
Exactly.
And it's not the only conflict where we see that happening.
Yeah.
But there's a confluence of circumstances here that make, unfortunately, always the Palestinians the obsessive target of these people, and I think that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, what I realized, Dr. Andrew, as well. I follow some of these Christian intellectuals in the United States, and before this recent Gaza carnage, it was the talk was always about how the Arabic people or Middle Eastern people or the people in the Levant have to embrace more secular values and forget about Islam. You're too much following the instructions of your religion, etc., etc. But once this Gaza carnage started, all of a sudden the discussion has moved from secularism into themselves giving justifications for whatever Israel is doing there based on religious texts, or claiming that they understand the prophecies. And I found myself in a situation that if they remove religion from the discussion, there is not much of an argument left for them in order to justify the Israeli policy nowadays in the Gaza Strip. I also realized that there is a focus on the historical trauma. Now, I am ethnic Armenian, and I grew up on the stories my grandparents and my parents always told me about the historical events that led to the mass murder of the Armenians in 1915 and a little bit before that. So we grew up with this, what we call a collective trauma, right? And similarly, Jewish people passed through a collective trauma, and they have been suffering for centuries from anti-Semitism, persecution, which led into the Holocaust in World War II. The question many people ask me here, can historical trauma, similar to what happened to the Jewish people and the Armenian people, can lead to such reaction of this scale by the Israeli side that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the trauma, and uniquely that trauma, is being centered completely in the arguments that you see justifying what's happening. And it comes down again to this conflation between a religion and the trauma of people of religion and a state guided by an ideology. And the problem is the ideology has got absolutely nothing to do with the religion. And by the same token as this kind of obsessing over just one particular trauma and identifying it with a state, with an ideology, you have the way they're talking about what Palestinians do in terms of resistance in whatever form as expressive of anti-Semitism, as being driven by some kind of visceral hatred for people of a particular faith, as if, I mean, is the argument then there that if the Israeli state was governed by a Hindu ideology state, would everybody in Gaza and the West Bank just lay their arms down, put their hands down, and just accept everything given to them by the Israeli state, which is nothing, no status, no statehood, no passport, no right of movement? Well, of course, the argument is absolutely ridiculous. Is arguments that are so insane that what shocks a lot of people is they're even being taken seriously by a government which still, unfortunately, leads this thing we're calling a peace process, who we're having to turn our TVs on to every day and listen to what their spokesmen have to say because they are the dominant player in this situation still. They're giving a license to these arguments that anyone can see make no logical sense. So, yes, I mean, to get to your point about trauma, it's all a question of perspective. There are many peoples that have gone through traumas in the world, in the modern world, and you mentioned one case. There are many others. We know the obvious ones in more recent history, like say Rwanda. There was the suffering of Bangladeshis during the Second World War. Ultimately, was a British problem in the time of the British Empire. There's a long list of peoples who have suffered in colonial contexts and in other contexts. But for some reason, this particular case of suffering is being used as an excuse by an ideology to impose this horrendous suffering on other people, which is the most base distortion of the message that should emerge from any trauma. It's not that because a huge injustice was done to one people, then that means we have a right to go and do it to somebody else. I mean, that's the last of the ethical message that comes out from any, or the moral message that comes out from any traumatic situation. But we're watching this this kind of moral collapse in real time. We're not watching simply the brutalities, the atrocities in real time. We're watching the moral collapse of a country that we knew had problems with its moral claims, but now it's so obvious, it's so in our face. We realize that they themselves are governed by a kind of clique of well, frankly, genocidal nutters, and that's problematic. We've all got a problem with that, and I don't know where it's going to go, but their idea that they can control the situation forever, I think, is obviously, that's a problem. It's not going to happen. They tried before to. There were efforts to prevent the campaign against apartheid South Africa in the 1980s. In Britain, the government then was very supportive of the South African government. There was a similar attitude in America, but it didn't work. So that's just one example about how the mighty cannot impose their will as much as they think they can.
Dr. Andrew, I was reading today a poll in Jerusalem Post, and this is the article in the Jerusalem Post. Since we're speaking about the Jewish historical trauma and its relationship to the carnage in Gaza, this poll conducted in January 2024 by Tel Aviv University found that a vast majority of Jewish Israelis believe that the Israeli forces are using appropriate amount or not enough force in Gaza. I mean, based on this poll, is it safe to assume that this Israeli disproportionate use of force in the Gaza Strip is also a reflection of the Israeli society and their beliefs?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a problem right now. Many people will say, okay, you can talk about the government in Israel, we can talk about the need to get rid of Netanyahu, but he actually reflects a broad swathe of opinion within Israeli society. We know that it's become a lot more right-wing, over the last 20 years or so. I remember in the 1990s where there was still the discussion constantly, but is it Labour that's going to be in power? Is it going to be Likud that's going to be in power? And now it's some further to the right, but further to the religious right as well, which I think is a really important point here. There's a conflict for control even within the army, because it's become much more religious, and it's that's a rank and file where people are coming from into the army is people from a political space that's much more than religious than before. So there's a kind of messianic's not the word, but there's a kind of like a religious drive to the way they're behaving. And it's really obvious to us in the last couple of months, the kind of language that they've been using since the very beginning of this. Language even 10 years ago. They were never talking in these kind of terms of their right to smite, and their right to take back. absolutely what is
Yes.
theirs, and all this kind of language that's being used now. There was far more a kind of shared language of humanitarian niceties that was being used before. And of course, we knew that behind that there was something else going on. It was under Labour governments that the secular movement took off in the West Bank. Even more, it started under Likud from 1977, but things really took off after Oslo. There was that excuse cover they were given politically, which then allowed the secular movement to really, rise up way more than it was before. And I think there are, in their mind, there are security reasons for that. They see people as a way of inserting people into the West Bank, as a way of giving themselves the upper hand and allowing them to do what they've started to do and what they may ramp up, which is to try and, forcibly move people on, which has always been there latent within the ideology. But the circumstances now have kind of kicked into gear these possibilities that were always there. So yes, the problem is really society being so radical. But I think it's a problem, though, that this is often kind of put out there as if to say, so you just have to deal with this society, that somehow their arguments have to be accepted. They're in the right simply because they all think that. That's not an argument. There are many societies that had quite crazy ideas that were completely unjust, and they didn't survive. The most obvious one being French Pied Noir Algerians up to 1962. In the space of 1 month, I'm not suggesting this is a direct comparison, but in the space of 1 month, 1 million people left the country. So, just because a society thinks one certain thing, which is completely ridiculous, doesn't mean that it gets away. Circumstances don't really work like that.
Exactly. Dr. Andrew, as a few hours ago, reports emerged from the Gaza Strip, and I want to screen this on the screen. This is from the Association Press. The World Central Kitchen charity holds Gaza operations after Israeli strike killed 7 workers. An Israeli airstrike killed 7 aid workers with World Central Kitchen, leading the charity to suspend delivery Tuesday of vital food aid to Gaza, where Israel's offensive has pushed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to the brink of starvation. Cyprus, which has played a key role in trying to establish a sea route to bring food to the territory, said ships that recently arrived were turning back with some 240 tons of undelivered aid. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu acknowledged that the country's forces had carried out the unintended strike, quote unquote, unquote, innocent people in the Gaza Strip. He says officials are looking into the strike and would do everything for this not to happen again. Footage showed the bodies, several wearing protective gear with the charity's logo, at a hospital in the central Gaza town of Deir el-Balah. Those killed include 3 British nationals, an Australian, a Polish national, an American-Canadian dual citizen, and a Palestinian, according to a hospital record. And those are their passports found in the scene. And I was checking as a journalist the reactions in Europe, in the United States, and I saw, for example, David Cameron says he's distressed by this attack, which included several 2 of the British nationals. Ursula von der Leyen, she didn't even mention Israel in her tweet, and she said those people lost their lives in the Gaza Strip while doing a noble work. It is very disheartening to me to see that these European and British politicians do not even dare to condemn Israel, even if and even when their own citizens are getting killed. If a similar incident happens anywhere else, let's say in Russia or in Iran or in Syria, the drums of war, we would hear it, right? And the media would repeat it, like, we have to go to war. But when it comes to Israel, even when their own citizens are getting killed, and this time the charity says this was deliberate attack because they were coordinating with the Israeli side and giving them the coordination. How this is something I really want to understand, from on what ground these politicians in the West stand on to avoid to play in this linguistic game and avoid condemning Israel, right?
It's the strangest thing. It's not the first time. There was the case before of the famous case of Rachel Corrie in occupied territories. I think in this situation, I'm thinking of, say, the UK. We had, in just a couple of years ago, the head of the opposition who wanted to completely change the nature of foreign policy. The kind of duopoly before, where both parties didn't really have that much of a difference on over the whole when it comes to foreign policy, certainly, was really being upended when you had the Labour Party headed by Jeremy Corbyn, and this was a mass movement. And geopolitical political parties do not like mass movements. They didn't like it in America when Bernie Sanders was able to do it, and they neutralized him. They didn't like it in the UK when Jeremy Corbyn was able to do it. And now you see, the membership of the Labour Party in the UK has gone way down. And we might think, naively, they would be upset about that, but they're not, because they don't want so many people, so many young people, or under 50s, let's say, interested in politics and going out and voting, because they will not be voting broadly with the same interests and ideas as the ruling class. So I think what we're dealing with now is this. I think there was a very heavy effort to buy, led from the Israeli embassy. There's been a lot of reports about this in the UK, to try and upend the hideous, from their perspective, prospect of Jeremy Corbyn's party winning. And, there's been a lot of revelations about the kind of funding that's going on to many politicians of the Labour Party. And that's just them. We can talk about the Conservatives as well. But, I think, unfortunately, in a number of Western political systems right now, the extent to which money talks and not the utopian ideal that the people do, or that the system is a reflection of what the people want, that's not what it's about at all. Right now, it's so obviously about who can buy who. And that's what's happening here. And as far as they're concerned, if you're on the wrong side, ideological component as well there, I think, for some, supporting the Israeli state is so important to them. Possibly, I think it's a generational thing as well, to be fair, that the older generations are so impacted by, in Europe especially, and in the West, they're so impacted by the particular traumatic event of what happened in Germany, or under the Nazi regime in the Second World War, that it really, their view of Israel is completely influenced by that. It colors it completely. So for them, protecting that state is almost, it's a priority amongst all others. It's obviously gone to a really ridiculous and difficult to understand extent. But I think it speaks to something else, which is, societies, say in the UK and in America, they've still leaned into the neoliberal model where the individual matters as a consumer, but the individual does not matter just as a God-created human being. That's not where the concern is. So if you're not on the right side politically, if you're not of some economic usage, but you happen to get into the wrong situation and you die, they're not going to care. And that's fundamentally what's happening here. They do not care, because and Britain there have been reports they are helping the Israelis with what they're doing in Gaza. They're trying to stop media coverage of what's happening in Gaza. There have been some outlets that are being given warnings by government entities that you can't talk about this and you can't talk about that. So it's a very strange situation where as well, protests, they would love to be able to outlaw protest itself, but what they've done is to take this term Islamism, and it's kind of being used as a stand-in for Muslim, basically.
Yes.
We're not against Muslims, we're against Islamists. So if you protest and you say the thing we don't agree, and you're being an Islamist. We're not saying we're against Muslims. Of course, their liberal pieties have to go in that direction. So, there's this kind of like playing with language that's going on there as well. It's comparable to 2002, before the Iraq War, where you had a huge part of the population that objected to what an elected government was doing, but couldn't do anything about it. Millions of people went into the street, but could not stop a government doing something extremely serious, something horrendous. And although it calls itself a democracy, people could not stop that. They will say, okay, it has to be the next election.
The same thing here is in Germany. The same thing here is in Germany. There are polls nowadays that the vast majority of the German people oppose the Israeli military conduct in Gaza, and they oppose their government's policy between Palestine and Israel. And if it's a democracy, the government should listen at least to the polls, to what the people want. But the politicians nowadays are so detached from the street, like they're in completely different la la land, and the people are in a different place as well. And in Germany, we don't have this the culture of going to the street and protesting against the government all the time. It's not like in France, right? They go sometimes into demonstrations, but also the media is under full control, as you mentioned, in Britain. And it's the same thing here is in Germany. The headlines are clear. They cannot pass through these headlines. And there is a narrative control happening. And despite that, we see that increasing number of people are waking up to the facts in Palestine, Israel, due to social media coverage. And now they're trying to control the social media outlets. Therefore, they say this is a hate speech, this is a misinformation, this is a disinformation. And Ursula von der Leyen comes and says the biggest threat faces humanity in the 21st century are not wars, are not climate change, she says. She says it is misinformation and disinformation. So from her statements, we understand where are they heading to. I don't think that Europe Europe and UK are going to be more democratic in the future. The elements of democracy will decrease, and the people probably will have some rights to protest, but the government will not listen to them in any ways. And the result is we have politicians like we have a foreign minister like Annalena Baerbock, we have a chancellor like Olaf Scholz and Habeck, and those are leading the government in a direction that the people do not want. And we are speaking about domestic policy, we are talking about foreign policy. This is the least popular government in the history of Germany since World War II. And despite that, they don't see themselves making mistakes. That's the real problem. They don't see themselves making mistakes. They see themselves that they're doing what they have to do for the sake of their country. I apologize for this technical problem. I will fix it now. So I will ask you this question, and I think this is about the Israeli recent attacks in Syria. We've seen what happened in the last week. First, Israel flew its jets over Jordan and then Al Tanf border crossing, where the American forces are located. The Americans have used their jamming technology to blind the Syrian radars. And the Israeli fighter jets flew over the deserts and they bombed eastern Aleppo. And then they tried to assassinate an Iranian official in Damascus. They couldn't. And yesterday they bombed the Iranian consulate, killing, I think, 4 or 5 Iranian generals, including a high-ranking commander in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And the question is, what's the goal here? What's the goal of Israel? Domestically, in front of its people, and regionally, because this type of attacks change the rules of engagement between Israel, Iran, Israel vis-a-vis Syria. I mean, some people say, like, it seems that Israel sees itself not achieving military achievements in the Gaza Strip, and they want to drag the United States into a major regional war. Because when you attack an Iranian consulate, you're attacking a sovereign Iranian territory. And this will require for Iran to respond accordingly, right? And they are forcing Iran to change the equations as well, these rules of engagement. And this is a very, very dangerous game. And I don't think anybody wants in the region a regional war except for Netanyahu and his radical elements in the government.
Yeah. I mean, their problem is they don't know how to end what they've begun. And as you say, it has not brought the results they promised. I mean, Hamas is still a going concern in Gaza, and not only that, it's if you were living in Gaza, who could blame anybody for joining a group that takes up arms against the invader right now? You don't have to be from Hamas. You don't have to be a sympathizer with Hamas. You just have to be anyone in Gaza who has who says, I'm not going to put up with this. So you're kind of actually feeding more resistance as this goes along. And that will not stop. And it kind of shows the futility of the entire process, because, of course, what's behind it is a desire to erase any political demand on the Palestinian side, on the idea that we have so much weapons, we have so much money, we have the most important country behind us, we can do what we want. And the idea that you cannot do that kind of drives them crazy. It kind of drives the neocons crazy. It drives Zionism in its absolute most radical forms right now, as we see, crazy. They can't take the idea that isn't enough to win. And it isn't enough to win. And the main reason you're not going to win is because all those people that you would like to erase, and you wish that you erased them in 1948, they're not only still there, they're equal in number to you within the borders of the country they all want to be Israel. Because, of course, they want the West Bank, they want Gaza, they want everything. But the number of people there equal to the Israeli population it's the same as the Israeli population. And, they desperately wish that they could offset some of that population into Egypt. At the beginning of this war, Blinken, to his eternal shame, tried to persuade the Egyptians to take in millions, hundreds of thousands, or a million or so of people from Gaza across the border. And everyone understood that would mean they wouldn't go back. Yes. There's one thing. I still do not think the Egyptian government will go ahead with that. I know the temptations for them are huge, but I do not think they will do it. Mubarak said the same during the Aqsa Intifada in 2001. I remember when I was working as a journalist at the time, and he came out with a statement. He said, I know what you want. You want to try and get rid of your Palestinian problem by getting rid of them, by pushing them to Egypt like you did in 1948, like you did in 1967. He was absolutely correct. That is what they want to do. Their eternal problem is they have to live with these people within the borders of the greater Israeli state. And they're living the dream right now. This is the high point of radical Zionism, which is that in its most radical, it's a radical movement, but at its most radical form, they have the dream right now. They really can get rid of them all. If we can't push them out, we'll actually kill them. I mean, This is the mentality. And I don't think it's going to work. And the come down for them, it's going to be a horrible hangover, but it's going to sink in over the months and years that you haven't made it. And then the moral panic's going to set in about what you've done. And the part of the population who now have gone crazy, essentially. I mean, this country's not only a rogue state, it's like a kind of crazy petri dish. It's been fed all this. It's been kind of mollycoddled by the Americans and American media and politics for too many years. They don't see how normal people in most of the world see them, but it's going to sink in. And it will sink in because they haven't succeeded, because they will not be able to eradicate the Palestinians. No. They will still be there. There will still be millions within their borders, and they will have to live with them and make a peace with them in the end. And this is the real problem for them. So you kind of almost feel sorry for them.
Actually, I totally agree with you on this. I mean, the failure of the Israeli side is this is a strategic failure for them. And demographically, they know that even though the Palestinians are equal to them, despite the Nakba and despite different attempts to kick out the Palestinians from their lands, but they see that even the birth rates among the Palestinians are higher. And in the future, when they want to occupy the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians will be the majority again. And in any electoral system, they will be defeated in the election. So they're trying to get rid of at least 2 million people now from the Gaza Strip to Sinai. And in my opinion, if the plan is, which they will not be able to do it, kick the Palestinians to the Sinai and then distribute them to Europe. But if the Palestinians are kicked to the Sinai, many of them, they will try to go back to Gaza. They will hold arms again, and there will be powers who deliver weapons to the Palestinians, and weapons are everywhere. And the Palestinians will carry arms, and this time they want to go back to Gaza. And then Israel will say there is a national security threat coming from the Sinai, and then they want to create another buffer zone inside of Sinai, right? They already occupied it in 1967 war, and this is what they do with the Golan Heights, and they try to create another buffer zone in Syria in 2017 and 18 in the southern part. And it's just an expansionist state. It's an expansionist mentality, and it's based on the occupation of the neighboring countries. And then we're the ones, I'm from Syria, and every time we get accused of being the aggressors in this case against Israel. And I just want to share my take on what happened in Syria this week, because this was very, very significant what the Israelis did in Syria. Israel targeted the Iranian consulate in Damascus. The Israeli attacks killed Abu Mahdi Zahidi, a high-ranking commander of the IRGC, his second in command, and 3 military advisors. This marks a significant escalation by Israel toward Iran, specifically targeting the quote-unquote axis of resistance. The strikes targeted a high-ranking IRGC officer who played a crucial role in Iran's operations in Syria. Moreover, the attack specifically aimed at the Iranian consulate, which holds the status of a sovereign Iranian territory. Consequently, Israel's strike can be interpreted as a direct attack on Iran rather than targeting targets that are quote-unquote Iranian-linked or Iranian affiliated, as the US and Israel have previously concealed using such terms. So what does Israel want? Israel wants to intensify and expand the scale of the conflict in order to compel direct involvement from the United States. American people need to understand the seriousness of the situation. Israel is actively attempting to involve their nation in another costly and dangerous conflict in the Middle East. Now, how will Iran retaliate? It is not easy to provide an answer to this question, as Iran operates based on strategic decisions rather than emotions. Tehran aims to manage the tense situation in the region as the quote-unquote axis of resistance continues to make slow but effective progress against the US-Israeli influence in West Asia. Iran's response is not to be underestimated, but the extent of their reaction is contingent upon various factors, including the location and nature of the response. On the other hand, the ongoing Israeli assaults on Syria demonstrate that despite the war and devastation caused by neocons and Zionists, Damascus remains a focal point in the conflict with Israel. Now, I would like to get your perspective on the response of the quote-unquote axis of resistance in this regard. Do you think that they will give the Israelis the chance to expand the conflict, or they will accept to swallow this strike in order to continue the policy of grabbing the points slowly on a longer run instead of going into an all-out war with the nuclear power like Israel?
I think they're going to be very careful. I mean, they have been so far. The Israelis have been desperately tempting Hezbollah into something major in South Lebanon, but already, Hezbollah made a major gain by forcing so many residents of North Israel to abandon their homes, at least for now. I mean, you see different numbers around. I'm not sure they want us all to know exactly what the total is, but I think the figures up to even have left their homes in northern Israel. Just knowing that situation persists in Israel and is a problem within Israeli society and within Israeli politics is in itself quite a gain. So, the calculations are different between what do the resistance side have to do compared to the Israeli side have to do. The responses don't have to be what we would consider the same. A military strike doesn't have to be met with exactly the same kind of military strike. I think it's a different kind of calculation. And so the predictions of some kind of moment where suddenly they sort of lose their mind, I think they're not going to do that. I mean, I've seen analysts, these ridiculous analysts for months saying, now finally, it's going to break out in Lebanon. That's it. The war's coming to Lebanon. We know the Israelis desperately want there to be a war in South Lebanon, but they've not been able to do so far. For one reason, they're frightened. They're frightened because the Hezbollah can do enough to cause serious damage to them that can bring down a government and could cause perhaps even more damage than that. They are frightened. Secondly, they're looking desperately for a way out. As we've said already, they don't know how to end this war. They always need to try and look for some way of shunting their problem to the outside, and they cannot. I've never been able to do it since one occasion in 1948 and a second occasion in 1967. And they're desperately, constantly flailing around to try and find ways out of this fundamental conundrum that they have. They cannot get rid of the Palestinian population. So I don't think Hezbollah is going to rush into anything rashly. Already there have been attacks on claims of, I don't know how true they were, but at least claims of attacks from groups in Iraq against targets even in Haifa. So, there's a kind of like, a thousand knives are kind of like doing their work in a way against the Israelis in this war, but they come out with their huge kind of showy performative attacks. But I think it would be naive to think that that's that's the way simply to judge strength and who's going to prevail in the long run. Just Netanyahu being forced out of office in itself would be a major gain politically, even if the next government isn't radically different. Just forcing this guy out of office in itself would be quite something. So no, I don't think that they will rush into anything. The Israelis desperately wish they would, but I don't think they will.
Exactly. Dr. Andrew, I would like to end up this conversation with you with a very short segment of a video for the Israeli government spokesman. His name is David Menzer, and I will play the video, and I would like your take on what he said in this regard.
Ideological to practical. Iran is seeking the destruction of the state of Israel. Iran is not only our enemy, Iran is the enemy of the US, UK, France, Germany, and all free nations. So we have to win. There is no substitute for victory. Now an update.
The definition is always like, what is victory? And Israel always tries to link its existence to the existence of the Americans with the Europeans. Like we are the same. Our faith is the same, right? And also, if Iran is my enemy, Iran should be your enemy as well.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that is always going on here is we're not talking about the destruction of the state. We're talking about the destruction of a political system. But they will always talk about a political system which is supremacist, which says certain people have full rights. It's a racist society itself. I mean, highly classist within itself. From to Jews from certain countries are at the very bottom of it, and below that, perhaps some Palestinian Israelis. But we're talking about the reconfiguration of a political system to be truly equitable within its territory, which it is not right now, blatantly. They want to call this destroying the state of Israel. This is never in anyone's understanding has been destroying the state of Israel. I mean, when people talk about, say, a one-state resolution to the problem of the Israeli state and its inability to grant rights to Palestinians, we're not talking about destroying the state of Israel. We're talking about destroying a system which is apartheid, which is supremacist, which is incapable of bringing justice, which has proven itself genocidal. So this language, I think more and more people are understanding that it's just kind of smoke and mirrors. It's meaningless language. It's completely over the top. A certain number of people will still tap into it because they have their own supremacist ideas. Some of Western civilization as being, in their view, having to assert its supremacy, and they're a little bit worried that right now it's not in that position anymore. Some people ideologically are committed to the Israeli state. Some people are obsessed by racism about when it comes to Muslims and Arabs. There's a lot of things going on there, but the swathe of opinion across the world that don't buy this anymore is huge.
Exactly. Dr. Andrew Hammond, I called you Hammond again. Dr. Andrew Hammond, thank you so much, really, for your contribution to my channel. It's a really valuable insight. I learned from you, and I was reading there are hundreds of comments here. Guys, it goes without saying that the X account of Dr. Andrew is in the description below. His Substack is in the description below. And I will add now the link to purchase his book, Late Ottoman Origins of Modern Islamic Thought, also in the description and also pinned in the comments below. And we will see each other, guys, on tomorrow, again, 5 p.m. Central European time, and it's 11 a.m. Eastern American time. Tomorrow, historian Cyril Amar is coming also from Koç University to Syriana Analysis, and we're going to discuss the recent events. Dr. Andrew Hammond, thank you so much again for being with me today. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.